Let me welcome all of you to Stoicon-X Milwaukee. This is the first one that we've had here in the greater Milwaukee area. By doing this, we join the ranks of some of the other cities that have been doing this, like Athens, Toronto, Moscow, New York City, Melbourne, Australia. There's a few others, but you notice they're all kind of bigger than Milwaukee. So this is kind of a big deal to be doing this here. I'm glad all of you decided to come out on this very wintry day. You know, it looks like winter has finally hit in Wisconsin. So maybe it's a good day to be inside talking about Stoicism and its applications to everyday life. This is an event that's being put on in part by the Milwaukee Stoic Fellowship. So those of you who are from the area, if you want to find out more about that, we meet monthly and sometimes during the year when it's good, right? Dan leads Stoic Walk and Talks weekly here in the Milwaukee area. We do quite a bit of this sort of engagement. And this is part of International Stoic Week. So International Stoic Week started about 2012. It was originally called Live Like a Stoic Week. And now it's turned into this massive worldwide event that thousands of people participate in. There are events all over the world, including before it, the big Stoicon that happened in Athens just last Saturday and had somewhere between 300 and 400 participants. There are Stoicon-X's all over the place and other Stoic events, including we have sort of a partner organization here, the New Acropolis of Chicago. They are having some Stoic events this weekend as well, so that's good to know. So if you want to know more, ask them about that. As I mentioned, this is being underwritten by a very generous sponsor who wishes to remain anonymous, in part because they exemplify what we could call Stoic benevolence. The idea that you do things not to get something out of it, not to get some fame or notoriety, but just because it's a good thing to do. This is a person who has helped not just this event out, but other Stoic-related events around the world in recent times. So this is a big thing for us here in Milwaukee. We have a lineup of some great speakers who are going to be talking about different aspects of modern Stoicism and kind of a nice range here. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'm also going to talk about, what is Stoicism, just in case anybody is wondering, what they got themselves in for. And then I'll talk about a little bit of history, and then I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. So we have Kevin Vost here from Springfield, right? Springfield, Illinois. Drove up quite a ways. He is a very prolific public speaker, has written a lot of things for Stoicism Today. As a matter of fact, he'll have another piece coming out in this series of Stoics for All Seasons in the coming weeks, so you might want to pay attention to that. You have about 20 books, I think, right? And he doesn't just do, you could call it applied philosophy in the large sense. He's also what is the degree of exercise fitness? I forget exactly what it is. It's
my academic degree is clinical psychology. But in fitness, it's I used to be a member of a board that certified personal trainers.
That's right. Yeah.
International Association of Resistance.
And you do quite a bit of speaking on that sort of stuff as well, right?
Faith of fitness, spirituality, philosophy.
Yeah. Fitness. So probably the book that if any of you have read Kevin, you'd know him best from is The Porch and the Cross, which is doing some comparative work between ancient Stoicism and early Christian thought, because they actually had a lot of influence on each other. Dan Hayes is our second speaker. Dan is another member of the Stoic Fellowship. I would say he's now a co-organizer, right, effectively. He's been leading the Stoic Walk and Talks, which are a brilliant idea. They read some passages, mostly of Marcus Aurelius at this point, but maybe you'll read some other things down the line.
We've gone outside of meditations.
Okay. And they get together for an hour and walk and discuss the things in one of our beautiful local parks here in the Milwaukee area. We've known each other, I think, since the inception of the Milwaukee Stoic Fellowship. And Dan is in the tech sector, has applied a lot of the things. He's a great contributor to our group in discussions. When people come and they have questions, well, what's actually going on with this passage? Here, Dan is often our go-to guy. Then we have Daniel Collette, my colleague from Marquette University, visiting assistant professor, right? Does work on Stoicism and work on other authors. You can certainly ask him, not other authors, other movements. You can ask him about that afterwards. And Dan is going to be discussing things in terms of the history of ideas, but bringing some things in that are useful for modern life as well. And when we say modern as philosophers, we don't mean right now, right? The modern period begins, with Descartes and Hobbes, and some people push it back further, Bacon, Machiavelli, but it more or less ended a while back. So we're now in a different period that we sometimes call contemporary or postmodern or late modern or any of these other sorts of things. So when he's talking about modern Stoicism, or Stoicism in modern philosophy, it's not exactly the same thing as Stoicism right now, but he will be also discussing that. I do also want to say something about the lunch that we have coming up and the reason why we partnered with the restaurant that we did. So some of you know the Tandem here in Milwaukee. Those of you who don't, I hope you'll have a very pleasant association with that after you eat their wonderful food. The Tandem, which is doing all of our catering, is owned by Caitlin Collins, who unfortunately right now is a bit under the weather. She had an injury a while back, but her restaurant is very ably administered because she can draw on an incredible amount of goodwill in the community. And you might say, well, why can she do that? It's because one of the things that she does is takes young people from the Lindsay Height neighborhood here in Milwaukee and teaches them culinary skills, teaches them how to work in a restaurant, and then sends them out into the greater Milwaukee area. So I think part of what she's doing, again, this notion of benevolence as part of justice for the Stoics, she's in a certain way, without tooting a Stoic horn, exemplifying that. So we wanted to partner with them. They also have incredible food, so that's another reason. Stone Creek, the coffee that you're drinking, is another local company who we very particularly like. They do a great job in their sourcing. Another organization that is particularly interested in issues of justice and fairness. And their coffee is incredible as well. What else do I need to talk about? Lightning round talks. One of the things that we'll be doing is these short 3 to 5 minute lightning round talks. You can think of it as a Stoic open mic that allows anybody who wants, well, if you sign up, of course, anybody who wants to give a talk about their experience with Stoicism or a particular idea. There is a cutoff of 5 minutes so that we can stay on schedule. If you can do it in 3 minutes, that's even better. Brevity, here is important. And we don't have a long, cane to pull you off a stage like the old days, but I will call time when it's time for that. And the idea is to get in as many people talking about their experiences as possible, because that's always quite useful. It's one of the great features of these Stoicon-X events. So I wanted to talk very briefly about what is Stoicism and a little bit about the history of Stoicism, and so why we're having this here today. I think a lot of you know quite a bit about Stoicism, so for many of you, this is just sort of review, and you can, kind of doze off if you wish to. But it may be useful for some others. So what is Stoicism? It's one of the great ancient schools of philosophy that has its origin in Athens with this guy Zeno of Citium. Very brief story. He's shipwrecked and he sees his fortune literally ebbing away into the Athenian harbor because he was carrying royal purple. He goes into a bookstore, starts reading Xenophon's stories about Socrates, the memorabilia, asks, where can I find somebody like this? And the bookseller says, well, you're in luck, buddy, because there's Crates right there. And go study with him. Crates was a Cynic philosopher. He studies with Crates for about 10 years. He also studies with two other philosophers, Stilpo and Polemo, representing the Megarian and Platonic Academy. And then he forms a synthesis, and he starts teaching at a place called the Stoa Poikile. That's why it's the people of the Stoa. And it takes off. Before too long, he's actually got a king asking him, hey, can you come up to Macedon to teach me about this? And he says, I can't do it myself. I'll send one of my students. And it becomes one of the major forces in, you could call it applied philosophy in the ancient world. It spreads far outside of Athens, spreads throughout the Greek-speaking world, goes into the Latin-speaking world as the Romans start taking everything over. And there are quite a few important thinkers who take it very seriously. You might have heard of Marcus Tullius Cicero, the great Roman statesman and lawyer. He's known for that as well, but also a philosopher. And he was not a Stoic himself, but he thought there was a lot of really great stuff in what the Stoics had to contribute. So he writes about them quite a bit. He also introduces his friend and you could say, I guess, colleague and compatriot in the civil wars, where they both faced Caesar, Marcus Cato, who was a Stoic philosopher, who embodied it, didn't write anything down, but he lived it out. The Stoics that we know are mostly what we call the late Stoics. Many of you have read Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius or Seneca. They're all, in that late period. Unfortunately, we've lost much of Stoic literature. With the scrolls that are starting to be, studied from Herculaneum, we might get some new stuff back in the canon. That could be quite exciting. Unfortunately, it looks like most of it's Epicurean, but, what are you going to do? Maybe we can find a few things. Now, so what is Stoicism? Some of the key ideas behind it are living in accordance with nature, a fully developed human nature, dealing with our thoughts and emotions in productive ways, and we're going to talk about that a bit. I think each of the speakers will probably hit on that at one point or another. Developing the cardinal virtues of justice, prudence, temperance, and courage as centrally valuable in a human life. Focusing on what is and what's not in our control, learning how to make that distinction well. And I would say discerning our duties to other people and getting ourselves to actually do them. It's very easy to say, well, I should do this. It's very hard to actually follow through, as we all know, I think. If you don't, then more power to you. But I know from experience how difficult it can be. So they've got this basic set of ideas. Now, how did we end up with modern Stoicism, and how did we end up here at Stoicon-X? Stoicism, it was very important in the ancient world. In Western Europe, it largely got absorbed into Christian thought. They had an incredible influence on the monastic movements. You can see this very clearly in the early writers, like, say, John Cassian. Epictetus survives in a sort of Christianized way, where they turn Socrates into Christ and call the philosopher the monk. A lot of it's underground at the time. And then in the Renaissance, in the early modern period, it takes off again. People start finding Stoicism a valuable way of approaching things in its own right. And I think this is part of what Daniel is going to be telling us a bit about. So then it goes on for a while, and it becomes part of, you could say, the academic philosophy that some of us study in school. In the 19th century, it doesn't have a really great following, you could say. This is where people start using lowercase s Stoicism to mean things like just being a tough guy and not showing emotion, which is not actually what uppercase S Stoicism is about. And in the 20th century, Stoicism undergoes this very interesting revival. And I'm going to tell you about it very quickly. If you want to know more about it, you can ask me about it later, but I want to stick to time. So Part of it is academic. There are people like A.A. Long who start, writing about the Stoics, researching them. Lawrence Becker, sorry, different Becker I'm thinking of. Lawrence Becker writes a new Stoicism, a real head cracker of a book, if any of you have plowed your way through it, but very important within the academic community. He started attracting a lot of other important researchers like Margaret Graver with her wonderful book on Stoicism and emotion. So you got that going on over here. Philosophers and psychologists start taking Stoicism seriously again. And then you also have, you could call it the psychotherapeutic approach to it. A lot of people don't know that the cognitive revolution in psychology that gives us rational emotive behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and other similar things are rooted in Stoicism. Albert Ellis draws extensively on Epictetus, on other things as well, but it plays a central role in that. So you've got those things going on, and then you've got people practicing it. So you've got somebody like Admiral Stockdale, who is shot down over Vietnam and happened to have memorized Epictetus' Enchiridion, and finds that it gets him through the harrowing experience of a Vietnamese prison camp where they're trying to break him over and over again, just brutalizing him. It helped him survive where many of his comrades didn't. So Stoicism is serving a purpose for a lot of people. And then the other sort of key ingredient in this is the internet. Because we live in an age where we have all this connectivity, think about it, the fact that you could sign up for this and find out about this, I think almost all of you, through the internet, it made it possible for a new modern Stoic movement to develop. And I got into it, sort of on the late end. I was invited to become the editor of Stoicism Today after I started contributing some pieces, and the old editor was coming down. And so I joined the team of the Modern Stoicism organization, which is now a nonprofit based in England that puts on Stoicon, that does, supporting the Stoicon-X's, puts on Stoic Week, which I mentioned we're in the middle of right now. And then there's another important organization that arose as well, the Stoic Fellowship, the International Stoic Fellowship. All these smaller member Stoas, for the most part, are member Stoas of this organization, and they kind of work together. That's all possible because all these things came together. Now, I'll close by saying this. The reason why all of this exists is not because people were like, Stoicism, that's kind of a cool hobby to play around with. It changes people's lives. It helps them to transform their thinking, the ways that they're responding in terms of their emotions, and it really helps a lot of people out. So that is why we're doing this sort of event. Obviously, you're not going to come in here, and if you've got some issue that we're going to do a thing on relationships later on, Andy and I. We're not going to solve any relationship problems off the bat, but Stoicism contains a lot of really great tools that over time you can start applying. So with all of that, I am simply going to turn this over to our first speaker,